Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Easy Conversations, a podcast where we have easy conversations. I'm your host, Furkan Dandia. In this week's episode, I sit down with Miles Bingham, aka the Sober Trekker. I met Miles over Instagram because I was really fascinated by his story and his posts. In this episode, Miles talks about his struggles with addiction, mental health, being in it alone, and how he decided to seek help. Miles gets truly vulnerable about taking a holistic approach and building in mindfulness and trekking into his life, which has allowed him to battle his demons. I'm really inspired by Miles' authenticity and his story, and I hope all of you get that out of this episode. If at the end of the episode you can leave a review, I would be truly grateful. Let's get right into it. Miles, thank you for joining me today on this episode, and I'm grateful for you to take the time and have this conversation today. And it's it's been crazy. Like we've just connected over Instagram, and within less than a week we're doing this podcast, so that's been pretty cool. But yeah, I just wanted to take that opportunity to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and where you're located. And yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for asking me on your podcast, Firkin. So this is, so I'm in the UK, and you are in Canada, right? Is it Vancouver?
Yes.
Yeah,
No, I'm in Calgary.
Calgary.
Yeah.
So we're having a chat over the expanse of the Atlantic. But so basically I live in London. And I have been sober for 6 years now. And I guess where you found me was on my little Instagram account, which is the Sober Trekker, which is kind of what I go by over on that on the Instagram account, where I just post pictures of my trekking and thoughts about mental health and sobriety. So I mean that's kind of me in a nutshell,
Yeah.
really. But yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you're originally not from London. Where are you from originally? And
So originally, I'm from a place called Leicester. So I originally grew up in a place called Leicester, which is north of London, which is in the UK. It's called the East Midlands.
yeah,
So the nearest town or the nearest city that you guys may have heard of is obviously Nottingham.
yeah.
So it's very close to Nottingham. So it's kind of I'm from Robin Hood country. So that's kind of where I grew up. It's not as how did I describe it? It's not as kind of cosmopolitan as London is. So it's not like a big international city. So there's not a lot to do around there. So that's why growing up, I kind of with everyone, we just all started drinking and taking drugs and doing all that sort of stuff together. So that's kind of where that started. But yeah, that's where my story sort of started, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, you've touched on it. So maybe tell us more, like how did it start? And yeah, like what was it like?
Yeah. So do you want me to just so you want me to just go into the to basically what happened to me, what kind of how I ended up as in the position that I did do, basically? Are you kind of looking for a full?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, like, how did it start? What was it like? And then kind of the journey you've taken over the years, and and
Okay.
being sober for 6 years. Yeah.
Okay, so basically, so as I say, I grew up in Leicester, and then I I started drinking around the age of 13, 14 with everybody else, and we used to drink up at the local park, and we used to smoke cigarettes up at the local park, and we used to steal I don't know, sherry or cider from our parents, and we would all go hang out. As I say, there's not a lot to do really.
Yeah.
And then my teenage years were spent in the early 90s when in the UK, the rave scene was massive. So there was a lot of legal raves, there was a lot of LSD and ecstasy and all that sort of stuff. And so I started, dabbling in all that sort of stuff. And then I had I used to take magic mushrooms and LSD by myself, which was ridiculous, really. And I had one evening where I took a large dose of LSD, and it really sort of muddled things up, and I had quite a terrifying experience, what I would describe as an out of body experience, total ego death, and all that kind of carry on. And it was absolutely terrifying. And about 2 to 3 weeks later, I started having flashbacks, so PTSD. I started with an anxiety condition as a result of it, and I started with panic attacks. And then, so obviously, with that kind of mental health condition, I started noticing that um, drinking alcohol or alcohol helped with that, because so I started self-medicating sort of quite early on. And then I muddled through my A levels and went to university and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And then after university, I went traveling, and I spent a very hedonistic 18 months abroad, around Southeast Asia and through Australia and all that sort of stuff. And when I came back, I'd noticed that something had changed in my neurology or brain chemistry or something. But I found it very difficult not to stop drinking once I started drinking. And so you've got mental health issues, and now you've got a problem where you're actually self-medicating with alcohol. And then I moved down to London, and I got a job in advertising. And the advertising industry is a very fertile ground for
Yeah.
addictive behavior. And so, I mean, this is a very abridged version of it, but over a decade, I descended into active alcoholism, quite dark mental health problems. None of it really got better. I was unable to control my drinking. My drinking was controlling me. I was doing things like having cocaine for breakfast and stuff like that. Just really what you would describe as kind of cliched addictive behavior. But when you're in the midst of it, it's incredibly dark. It's very lonely. It's very stressful. It consumes you. And so you end up in quite a isolated, dark mental place. And
Hmm.
I think basically what happened to me was, everyone talks about rock bottoms. I had lots of rock bottoms. I had lots of stupid things that I did, moronic things I did, distressing things I did, disgusting things I did. But none of it really made me stop. I basically just ground to a halt, both physically and emotionally. And that's when I finally reached out for help. And then from that moment on, I slowly at first began to accept that I had a problem with alcohol, and that I had an issue with mental health, and I had an issue. And it was slow at first. But then I find myself in AA, and then slowly but surely I started speaking to more people, and my attitudes and this wall I'd built up around myself, this psychological wall,
Hmm.
began to crumble, and I started getting better and better and better. And then yeah, through group therapy, AA, chatting to people, I did a course in meditation and mindfulness. I did. I started taking medication and stuff like that. I started exercising a lot more. I started taking an interest in nutrition. I started doing a lot of reading on neurology, psychology, addiction, and all that sort of stuff. So I kind of replaced my addiction for drugs and alcohol with this thirst for knowledge, and understanding my condition. And it's around that time that I started doing trekking.
Hmm.
Um, and that became a really big part of my recovery. Getting out in nature became a really big thing for me. And I
Yeah.
find that getting back to nature and reconnecting with nature allowed me to reconnect with myself and all that kind of carry on. And so I found that in nature, I found the serenity that I was kind of chasing with drugs and alcohol that was never afforded to me. There's a peace in nature, whereas really that's all an addict wants, is peace
Yeah.
of mind. And you use drugs and alcohol to soothe mental health conditions. And so it never works, because you're never finding peace. All you're finding is oblivion, and that's the difference. Whereas in nature, you find peace. And so that's
You're
why I ended up doing this sober trekker thing, which is where you found me. Is just
yeah,
basically, it's just that's kind of that's why I started doing that, because I thought, well, if I'm finding this useful, maybe some other people will find it useful. And it seems to have resonated with people, which is, it sort of surprised me, but it seems to be resonating with people in both the trekking community, the mental health community, and sobriety circles. So,
mhm.
so it's been a success.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And sometimes that's all it takes. But thank you for sharing the story, and it's just some questions around along the way. So, you mentioned that what really, I guess, first of all, like what pushed you towards drugs when you were in your teens? Was it just because that's what everyone was doing and it was kind of the thing to do considering where you were and there was nothing else to do? Is that kind of what
Well, I tell you
initiated
what.
that?
So on face value, you would go, oh, there was nothing else to do, and everybody else was doing it. But I think
Yeah.
if you when you dig under the surface, what tends to happen, I think, and all of us do this, because all of us are innately insecure. I don't know anyone who isn't insecure. Everyone
Hmm.
has insecurities.
For sure.
So the ego will then find ways to protect you from those insecurities. So what our egos do, what my ego did, was that I wanted acceptance in the friendship group. When you're a teenage lad from Leicester or wherever you're from,
Hmm.
Calgary or whatever it is,
Yeah.
you will do things, and it's, toxic masculinity plays a role, but you'll do things to be liked, you will do things to be cool, you will do things to be seen as hard, you'll be do things to be seen as the rebel, you will do all these sort of idiotic things that young teenagers do, and all you're striving for is acceptance in your group. And it's sort of, if you look at primates and the way their hierarchies are structured, it's no different. We are primates after all.
Yeah.
So it's almost as though what you're trying to do is you're trying to find your place in the friendship group or the hierarchy of your little tribe. And so that's what happens. And so you do drugs to fit in because everybody else is doing it. You drink alcohol because it allows you to be the person that you think other people want you to be.
Yeah.
And so it's driven by the environment you're in, but also the need for acceptance. Now, people might say, oh, it's a lack of willpower, but it's not. It's actually that it's usually driven by a need to belong. And then what you realize is that it's this need to belong, but also it solves a lot of the other insecurities you have. You when you drink, you feel okay, you feel at ease with yourself, you're able to do the things that you think you need to be able to do, and suddenly it's sort of like this wonder substance that allows you to and it calms your ego down and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
um
And that's kind of what you were chasing was that need to belong and just fit in, right?
yeah.
And everyone does it differently. We all go through it, like you said, based on our insecurities. Um, so you mentioned that one specific episode you had with LSD. How old were you when, you know, that happened?
I was still a kid. I was 16.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And
And it
and
was,
then, sorry, go ahead.
but it wasn't uncommon for the area where I grew up for us to be doing that. It sounds, it like, saying it out loud, it sounds like an extremely young age to be taking class A's, but
Yeah.
I mean, everyone was doing it. There were people, and I remember my friendship group um, were taking LSD, and then I think the next year, although I managed to get, I didn't because I got a girlfriend in the end, but a lot of them moved on to heroin and stuff like that. And it's crazy thinking about it. It's
Yeah.
really, it's bad.
And are you still in contact with those guys or like
Um, yeah, I mean, the friendship group, it's funny. It's like most of us survived all that nonsense, but there were about there's three or four people that seriously got into, you know, trouble with heroin and stuff, and a couple of them ended up in prison, and a couple of them ended up in psych wards and all that sort of stuff. And it's whereas the rest of us, we forged our, either people moved away, got out of it, or went to university and all that sort of stuff. And I'm painting a picture probably of something that is incredibly hard or something like that, or rough, and it's not. It's kind of, it's just rural England. I don't know how to describe it other than
Yeah.
it's not. We aren't. This isn't the Bronx or
Yeah.
some kind of the projects or anything. It's just these are little villages in England. I don't know how to describe. There's nothing Hollywood or sexy about it. It's just it's all a bit mundane, if I'm
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it was, you kind of all went through it and then kind of found your ways in the end.
Yeah,
Other than
yeah,
the few that got left behind, and
yeah.
and that must be tough to watch, right? Like in terms of the,
Um, it's really strange because it's only when you chat to other people about it, but because you sort of normalize it. It was, I don't know how to describe it. It's because it's where you grew up, and it just seems normal that happened. But then when I do speak to other people about it, they kind of go, "Yeah, our childhood wasn't like that." But then other people, I don't know. I think there's a north-south divide in England anyway.
of
There's
course,
like
yeah.
people from Newcastle and Liverpool and Manchester and stuff. I think it's more the what would tend to be the sort of the more industrial cities. It tends to be a bit more. I'm sure it's the same in Canada and America and
Oh
and all
yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, it does. We have similar situations in some of the smaller towns where, everyone just goes there to work, and there's not much else to do. So then people
Yeah,
do kind of play around with drugs.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
unfortunate.
yeah.
Yeah, so I guess at 16 you had that episode, and then all that PTSD and anxiety. Were you at that point in your life, did you know what was the source of the anxiety, or you just wanted to numb the pain?
No, so when that happened, I'm like I say, I was still a kid, really, still a teenager.
Yeah.
Um, it was terrifying actually because I thought I was going insane. I didn't realize that what I was going through was post-traumatic stress disorder or generalized anxiety or panic attacks. I thought I was genuinely losing my mind, and I didn't access help for a long, long time, and it was extremely traumatic for about, I would say, 4, 5, 6 years. Um, and I only really accessed. I went to the doctors when I was about 20, 21, and finally I sort of half told them what was wrong with me
Hmm.
and just said I had insomnia, but I couldn't sleep. So I don't know. Looking back, I'm amazed that I don't know. I just, all I remember is not wanting to commit suicide, but just feeling as though uh, being unconscious was a respite from it
Yeah.
all. So sleep or blackout was very attractive. Um, I mean, saying it out loud, it sounds very bleak, and it kind of was. But I mean, I still muddled through, and then yeah, and then I finally did get help, and then I finally went to the doctors, and then I was prescribed SSRI for the anxiety and all that sort of stuff, and I've kind of been on and off that ever since, and but that was a precursor to the alcoholism. So it's, I mean, I've probably done everything. I have probably done everything you possibly can to become an alcoholic, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. No, yeah, no, it does. So then you got into that whole uh you were using alcohol to self-medicate, and then you started to travel, right? You kind of you mentioned Southeast Asia, Australia. Was that helping the anxiety, or was it contributing to it, being away from home and just
So the reason
traveling?
I went traveling is because I just wanted to get away from the UK. And
Yeah.
so the thing is, you often you try and run away, but did it help? I mean, I smoked a lot of opium in Thailand, which wasn't probably particularly helpful. Um, and then, I mean, when I was in Australia, I started going on 2, 3 day binges, which is where I started, where you would drink, but it was always done through the lens of sort of being a party animal or rock and roller, but you would drink. So you would start drinking on a Friday, get up, start drinking on a Saturday morning, drink all the way through Sunday morning, and drink all the way through. But I think what happens is you cross a neurological Rubicon where you must change the chemistry in your mind, and you must damage something with your dopamine system, or something goes wrong.
Hmm.
I don't know, but I noticed that when I came back, I'd changed. That's that. So did it help? No. I think that caused that was the moment, I think, that I became an alcoholic.
Right. And how long were you, like, was that period for where you were traveling?
So I did that for 18 months, and then I think I came back and I noticed my first symptom of alcoholism that I noticed was that I wasn't able to stop at one or two drinks. That's the first one. And that's usually people go, hey, I know I'm not an alcoholic, but I've got a drinking problem where I can't stop after one or two. And you think, well, you're on the path, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
And if you're drinking alone, or you're drinking for emotional reasons or anything like that, I mean, that's usually a telltale sign in my mind.
Hmm.
But it took me it was another decade of drinking like that. And it's sort of, you accelerate towards it very slowly, and then it kind of, it just, and then it suddenly accelerates at the very end. That was my experience with it. Or
Yeah.
you sort of, you're on this slow kind of drop off. But
Yeah. And while you obviously you were struggling with the alcoholism, you were still working, right? And how were you
yeah,
able to balance?
functioning. Yeah, I was a high functioning one. I was still doing ad campaigns, famous
Yeah.
music videos and stuff like that. So it was kind of, I still maintained um, all my, paid the rent, went to work, hid it very well. But I was just exhausted. It's incredibly what you would do. I would spend a day like ill, basically,
Hmm.
with a hangover, and then do 2 days worth of work the next day, and then drink again. It was just like they call it the misery go round. And it was just a cycle of abuse and misery and depression and horror. And it's horrible, absolutely horrible.
And how was it impacting your relationships? Like, were you noticing that in the moment, obviously, like the impact it was having on friendships or just relationships in general?
um I mean, I never held down any kind of relationship with women particularly well. They're not, they don't really take to that kind of behavior particularly kindly.
Hmm.
But friendships and stuff, I mean, everyone kind of knew, and everyone was relieved when I finally stopped and all that sort of stuff. But it wasn't, I don't know it wasn't, I think the person that it hurt the most was me, really. I think people thought I was just very gregarious and extroverted and just a bit of a handful. But really, but what I did do was towards the very end, I started drinking on my own. So it was, although I had drunk on my own a lot anyway, but I
Yeah.
stopped going out. It became a very lonely, isolated condition in the end.
And do you feel that was more intentional on your part, just so you could be alone and push people away, or it's just the way it worked out?
Well, it's kind of a bit of both. So, what the thinking pattern or the psychology of it is, I started drinking alone so I didn't misbehave publicly,
Hmm.
but it also means that there's no one there really. I used to find that everyone drank really slowly, and I found that really frustrating. So, when you're on your own, you can just, no one's there. You're not having to, all bets are off. You don't have, there's no crowd control or anything. You kind of just go, right, I can, and you can do a bottle of wine in half an hour type thing. No one
Yeah.
will bat an eyelid.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I guess so, that whole period was, full of loneliness. Was there any specific event or incident that really, brought it to your attention that, okay, it's time to get help now? Or it was something you knew you needed, and what pushed you over the edge to go finally seek help?
Like I said, it was basically, it was it wasn't a specific thing. I was just exhausted. I think everyone, you just get this, you get to the point where you're done and you know you can't keep going with it. It's too exhausting. And I think people just, everyone that gets in, they talk about surrender or the gift of desperation and all that sort of stuff. But you just end up in such a dark, lonely place. And I think for whatever reason, the people that get well or get sobriety just reach a point where they just they give up. They just give up and go, I can't do anymore. And that's when you finally decide to get sober. But it's only until you get to that point that you'll get help. I mean, it's very difficult to persuade an addict or an alcoholic to stop unless they're at that point. And that's why it's so difficult to treat people for addiction. It's a psychological condition, a mental health condition that's really insidious, because it's kind of, you cling to the very thing that's killing you.
Yeah.
It's horrible, really.
And why do you think that is? Like, why do people cling to it?
So it's basically, the psychology of that is that the ego, or you feel as though the only escape from your problem is the drug or the alcohol.
Hmm.
So you cling to it as your only place of safety, and you cling to it wholeheartedly in the belief that it's the only thing that can protect you, it's the only thing that can keep you safe, it's the only respite you have from the world. And you believe this wholeheartedly with everything, and your ego will not let you do anything that will jeopardize your safety blanket. And so it's really difficult. You're kind of, you are asking people to give up the one place that they feel, the only place that doesn't make them feel in pain.
Hmm.
You're asking people to give up psychological anesthetic. And the only way I can describe it is it's like asking someone to, I don't know, stop pouring water on themselves if they're on fire. It's that's why it's so difficult to get people out of that. And it
Yeah.
takes bravery, it takes guts, and it really takes courage to find sobriety. I take my hat off to everyone, because it really is. It's a big, big, big step. But when you do it, it makes such a positive shift in your life, and you look back and you go, I can't believe what was I thinking. It's astonishing once you recover.
Yeah. Yeah. No. For sure, that makes sense. And so then you started AA. You went into the program. You mentioned that the for you, you didn't believe the 12-step program alone would have made a difference. You needed to really have that thirst for knowledge and understanding the psychological aspect of it, the neurology behind it. Can you explain more of that? Like, what drove you to
Well,
have that thirst?
so I think, so first of all, I've found AA definitely got me sober, and the 12 steps were phenomenal. But I think for me, I think you need, with any mental health condition or anything like that, I think it's you kind of need a toolkit. You need to look at it holistically, not just one thing. And just because it's, there are many aspects of the condition of alcoholism or addiction, and one is they talk about spiritual malaise, they talk about it's physical, it's mental. So you need to look after your mental health. So I started taking medication, I started meditating, I started doing mindfulness. So
Hmm.
that looks after the mental health side of it. I started taking my care of myself physically and doing all that sort of stuff. But then I've always had an interest. I mean, I'm agnostic, so I wasn't able to do any of the praying or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so science has always been the thing that I've always relied on and found answers in and found solace in science. And so I was just really interested to understand what was actually going on, what was causing my condition, what was at the root of it. And so I decided to just read a lot of books. And there's I forget the author, but there's a really good book called Never Enough, Never Enough, Never Enough, Never Enough. And I think she might be a Canadian, but was a neuroscientist who was addicted to meth. I think it was. I think she started taking meth to be able to work.
Hmm.
And so that was really good. And then I read a lot of stuff by. There's a really good book by another Canadian, Gabor Mate.
Oh
Have you
yeah, I've
heard of
never. No, I haven't.
Gabor Mate? So he's a psychiatrist that worked for many years with the addicts of downtown Vancouver. And he has a book called In the Realm of the Hungry Ghosts, and he's a fantastic. He's got videos all over YouTube and all that sort of stuff. So he's a Hungarian Jew who grew up during who was a baby during the Holocaust.
Hmm.
Um, but he talks about trauma, he talks about psychology, he talks about addiction, he talks about ADHD, he talks about all these things. He's just a fantastic role model and speaker on the subject of trauma and addiction. And what everything that he says, everything that he writes really resonates with how it feels to have this condition, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it sounds like for you, it was like you mentioned, the holistic approach made a huge difference. And often, at least on the outside looking in, it appears that most people don't take that approach, right? Like some of the people that were maybe in your group sessions, did you find that it maybe was harder for them because they weren't treating it holistically?
Well, I think so as well. And I have to say, there are people in this 12 step programs that say you need to come off your medication, you have to do it like this. And I find that irresponsible because, one, they're not trained psychiatrists, they're not GPs, they're not doctors.
Hmm.
So to tell someone that God will will sort it out is highly irresponsible.
Yeah.
But again, they're not well people. So I think what you have to do is you have to use group therapy, because you form a connection with people and you meet people that have the same condition, and that's incredibly helpful from a psychological and comfort point of view,
Hmm.
because you can chat to people that have been through it, they've had the stumbling blocks, and they can help you. But then I think you need to, so why the addiction, why the anxiety and all that sort of stuff? Well, there might be a serotonin imbalance or a dopamine imbalance or a GABA imbalance, whatever it is. And so that needs to be addressed, and then you need to look at things like core beliefs and stuff like that that's informing your mindset, because your mindset's probably slightly incorrect in the way you view the world. So a lot of getting sober is about reframing your mindset and reframing how you deal with anxiety and how you deal with trauma and how you deal with adversity. And
Yeah.
I think for me, part of getting healthy is being able to reframe things in a way that is a lot healthier, that I perhaps hadn't done up until now. So it's a lot of it is sort of basic psychology and learning psychology. And I think the steps is a version of that, but there's lots of other ways that you can heal. Stoicism, Buddhism, philosophy, and stuff like that they all have ways of approaching and looking at the world that accept the things you cannot change and the courage to change the things you can is a really good basic way of living. You just go, okay, well, I can't do anything about the rain, so not a lot I can do. So you just have to, rather than trying to change everything and control everything, you just have to go c'est la vie. And I'm finding that kind of works.
Yeah, no, and you talked about change in mindset. So is there anything specific that you had to do, like in changing your mindset? Like what was the message you were telling yourself up to that point, and how did you reframe it?
So what the steps do, so step 4 is you do a moral, they call it a moral inventory. And what you do is you go through all your resentments,
Hmm.
basically everything that makes you angry, everything you're afraid of, and everyone you've harmed. And what you do is you end up seeing patterns. And so a lot of people with anxiety, what they're trying to do is they tend to live in the future. They tend to catastrophize. If this doesn't happen, this will happen. If that doesn't happen, that will happen. If
Hmm.
this doesn't happen, I'll end up on the street. If I don't do this, I'll end up penniless, or I'll, blah blah blah
Hmm.
blah blah. So what the mindset of someone who is anxious is they are trying to control outcomes before it's even happened, and you can't control the outcomes. It's. And so it's about spending a lot more. So mindfulness there is a great way of retraining and reframing it, is just by going, okay, well, that's a month away. I'm in the here and now. So you just bring your mind into the here and now. And I found that was phenomenally helpful. um, stuff like that. Or rather than trying to control outcomes, you just simply go, well, let's see what happens. Or if bad things happen, you just simply go, okay, what can I learn from this?
Hmm.
And I think it's just a lot healthier. It's you move from a closed mindset to an open mindset, or I think they call it a growth mindset. What can I
Yes.
learn from this? How does it work? How do I grow from this?
Yeah. No, no, that's I agree. That's the stuff I'm teaching myself as I go along my own journey too. But
Yeah.
so then, the trekking. So now, you said the trekking's made a huge difference. Being in nature, it brings you that same peace you were seeking all along. Maybe I just want to understand what got you into trekking. It was something that you were doing before, or you just started doing as part of this process, and then you've just fallen in love with it.
No, I've always like so the part of the country where I'm from, you've got the Peak Districts, and then you've got the Yorkshire, which is just they're not far off. So that my family's from that area.
Yeah.
So my grandfather was very much into walking and all that sort of stuff. So it's very much a generational activity. But no, and then I just really liked it. I'm the first year I got sober, I went up to Scotland and for some solitude, and I just went up to the mountains and just really thought about what had happened, my my journey. I thought about sobriety, everything that had gone on. I just found it very healing, and so I continued to do it. And then the more I continued to do it, and I got really into photography, and I just really enjoyed it. I just brings me peace. It's amazing seeing some beautiful places. You get to travel, meet people. I've been to Iceland, Patagonia, Nepal. I've done the Annapurna circuit.
Yeah.
I've just got in the summer I did Switzerland, Italy, and France. There's a big thing you can do there. I'm going to probably go to Canada at some point. I'd like to go to Alaska. I'd like to
Yeah.
do, there's so many places I'd like to go.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's very helpful, and I know they're beginning to. I know the doctors in Scotland are now prescribing nature to people. They are actually saying go out in nature and for mental health issues. They're actually it's now seen as a legitimate treatment.
Hmm. Oh, for sure. Yeah, it does make a huge difference.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and one of the things, again, kind of being on the outside, you hear about is people having relapses or falling back into it. Is that something that concerns you or worries you?
Yeah, it does, because it's I really don't want to go back. I genuinely don't want to go back to it, and sometimes you get and this is quite common for addicts and alcoholics, is that you will get using dreams, where you will dream that you are high again or you're drunk again, and you wake up and it's quite a relief. But yeah, but that's why you have to keep. That's why I know people always ask. They go, "Oh, so why do you have to keep going to AA?" But to what basically what you the reason you keep going is just to keep reminding yourself that of what you are and the condition you have, because the condition, like sometimes if I miss, I don't go for a few weeks or even a couple of months, my mind will go, oh, maybe I'm all right now, maybe I can have a nice glass of wine. And I know I
Yeah.
can't have a nice glass of wine, because a nice glass of wine leads to a bottle of wine and leads to all sorts of
Hmm.
2 bottles of wine and cocaine and all sorts. So it's just, as long as I don't pick up that next drink, I'm perfectly safe. But I have to be vigilant, and you have to kind of the way I sort of see it, it's like a little gremlin that I keep locked up. It's in there and it's part
Yeah.
of me, but as long as I don't give it, I don't spill water on the gizmo, it doesn't turn into a gremlin, and it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fair. And what kind of message would you tell people that are in similar situations that are, kind of struggling the same way and have had relapses and are still going back and forth? Like what
It's
would you
very
tell
difficult
them?
because
Yeah.
it's very difficult because I've only relapsed once myself, and that was in early recovery after about a month. But I know people that have gone back out and they find it really, really hard. Um, I think often, though, that people that do relapse, they sort of talk about how they disconnected from it. And it's about, and the way I view mental health is the same as physical health or physical fitness.
Yeah.
And going back to the toolkit, if you look at someone who goes to the gym, regularly runs and eats well, they're in really good shape. And your mind is no different. If you do things that are very healthy, um, I don't know if I mentioned, but I do morning pages as well. So I do journaling in the morning, then I meditate for about 25 minutes. I make sure I get enough sleep. I go for a run and exercise, and that rushes. So I'm doing all the things that I need to do to keep my mind in shape. Because if I
Yeah.
don't do that, um, my mind gets weak, and I don't mean weak as in I lose intellect or anything like that. It it,
Yeah.
it it lets the darkness back in it, as it were, and I don't want to do that. So I don't mind doing these things every day to keep that away. And I think that the trouble is, if you stop doing those things or you move away from recovery and you think you're I think the trouble is people often think that they're different from other people, and they're not. Addicts are addicts, and you have to keep an eye on it, basically.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I'm glad you mentioned kind of your daily routine. Is that so? You basically, you have to be diligent, right, and stick to that routine of meditation and journaling. Is that something you do every day?
I try to, yeah. So I started. I do 2 pages of journaling. So what I do is I wake up and I just write a stream of consciousness. So if I'm worrying about something, and it just seems to get it out of your head, and so
Yeah.
it's almost as though the act of writing it, I don't know how it works, but it seems to help. Then I do 25 minutes meditation, and then all I do is that I don't have a mantra or anything. I just concentrate on the breath. My mind will wander off, and I bring it back. It'll wander off, bring it back, wander off, bring it back, and it's like doing bicep curls or press ups. The more I can bring it back,
Yeah.
and it's just a good exercise to your mind. So when you start worrying and start anxiously thinking about things, you can bring it back, bring it back, bring it back, and that's all I do. And then throughout the day, I kind of, because you can meditate on sound as well. So I do like mini meditations. If I find myself, I'll just do 2 minutes of listening to something and just go, there's the traffic there, there's birds there, there's a plane there, and you just do that, and it's amazing at how quickly doing that will have an effect on your mental well-being.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. Um, so I guess looking back now through everything you've been through, is there anything you would go back and you would be like, okay, well, this is something I would change?
Um, no, I don't think so. I don't have. There's shameful moments and stuff, but I don't think yes, I could go back and go, I wish I didn't do that. I wish I
Hmm.
hadn't eaten a cactus when I got drunk and ate a cactus in a pub. When I met my brother's girlfriend for the first time, that was ridiculous. But other than that, I think that everything I've done, I've led quite an interesting existence, and I continue to live an interesting existence. And I don't really, my thing isn't the past. My thing is always the future. I
Hmm.
worry about the future, but once the past is the past, I don't dwell on it so much. But I think everyone either struggles with the past or they struggle with the future.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm more of a past person, so
Yeah. So yeah, my issue is the future. I'm petrified of the future. Whereas
yeah,
the past, I've done the most ridiculous things, and I kind of go, well,
yeah.
you know.
And
So your thing's the past, is it?
yeah, yeah, I get really, really stuck in the past, and that's been my challenge, being able to navigate through that. And yeah, again, it starts with finding forgiveness for yourself, understanding, a lot of the things that did happen to you in the past were obviously not your fault,
Yeah.
and it's okay. And for me, it's being when I'm triggered, it does bring up feelings from the past that I've buried deep inside, and it makes me a person. Like when I'm triggered, it makes me an angry person because of all that stuff I buried inside. So that's been my challenge, getting stuck in the past and dwelling on it. But
Yeah.
like yourself, the journaling makes a huge difference, because when you do put your thoughts on paper, it's just, it feels like it's a form of release. And when you start reading the words, you're like, okay, this isn't that bad. And the meditation, right? It's being able to just calm yourself down and breathe. And for me, it's often focusing on or just scanning my body and finding where that source of trigger is and where I'm feeling it, and just breathing through it. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a really good technique. If ever I feel, if I'm feeling negative emotions, I analyze where it is. Like anger, I will, okay, I'm feeling it in my chest or my throat or wherever
yeah,
it is. And I find that it helps dissipate it. But I think what I found very useful is acceptance. And it sounds more simple than it is. It's, you kind of
hmm,
just have to go. You have to go. Okay, that has happened. There's nothing, and it's it, and I think if you're dwelling on the past, I think if I don't know if you've read any Stoic philosophy. I'd
yeah,
suggest a bit of Stoic philosophy is always is very good
yeah,
for anything like that. Is it Maximus Aurelius? I don't know. He was a famous Stoic
yeah,
Roman emperor, and it's just very interesting how he approaches it. So you can only, and again, it comes back to that serenity prayer, but you can only affect the things that you can affect, and the only thing that you can actually have control over is your own thoughts and the way you relate to the world. You can't control anybody else's thoughts, you can't
no,
control anybody else, and the only thing that you can do is within you. And that's where I think that whole thing of reframing um how your relationship with reality is becomes quite interesting. You
yeah.
know,
No, I agree. And for me, the biggest piece of work this year, over the course of this year, has been the reframing, because often, and you know, for me, being a sensitive person, I personalize a lot of stuff, and being able to reframe and tell myself that, if someone's doing something, they're not doing it to harm me or attack me or hurt me. It's something that they're struggling with their own demons, and that's
yeah,
not for me to personalize. It is really hard work, obviously, but like you said, and I couldn't agree more. All of this mindfulness and you know training your brain is exactly like going to the gym. It takes time and effort and
yeah,
diligence, and like any muscle you're training, that's exactly how you need to train your brain. It takes that much effort.
yeah. Totally agree. Completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, anything else, Miles, you want to share with the listeners, or just because for me, the purpose of doing this is, again, talking through mental health struggles, and I feel like we don't do that enough. And my goal is to be able to give people an opportunity to voice their struggles or feel that they're not alone. But is there anything you want to share with listeners out there, in terms of what can help them?
Um, I think it's. I think don't. I think the biggest thing is just don't be afraid to ask for help. Someone will always be supportive, and someone, and there, it is a cliche, but there will always be someone somewhere who's already gone through exactly what you're going through, and so someone somewhere will have the solution to the darkness that you are currently going through. And I think that's been my experience. And on the whole, it's not something to be ashamed of. Everyone gets it. Everyone has problems. Everyone has issues. Everyone has demons. We're all human, and I think on the whole, no one knows what they're doing, do they? No one knows what
No,
they're doing. No one's got their shit together,
no.
and the belief that everyone does is just a fallacy. No one knows what they're doing,
Well, and
is what
that's
I
the
would
biggest
say.
thing for me, going through some of my struggles, and just going through a divorce. Even I realized that, often people, you look at them, they seem to have it all together, but you just don't know what's going on
No,
behind the scenes.
no. And it's only when you start opening up to people, like, because I'm very open about my alcoholism and all that sort of stuff. The amount of people that will open up to me about mental health is astonishing. People that I thought were really strong would say, I'm suffering with OCD, or I'm suffering with this, or my wife's drinking too much.
Mhm.
Can you have a word, or something like that? It's so prevalent. It's I don't know anyone that hasn't got their own struggles with
Yeah.
something. You
Yeah,
know.
no, for sure. Yeah, and until, like you said, being able to just talk through it helps. And for me,
Mm.
another goal is to build that community of people just talking to each other and helping each other out. Because if we don't support each other, then what's the point?
Mm. Well, it's a very noble cause. Got to be honest. It's very noble of you to try and create a community of people that talk openly about it, because I think people do need to talk about it. And I don't know why we don't. There is still a little bit of a stigma.
Yeah, it's getting better. The fact that we're having this conversation, I don't know if uh, we would have been able to do this 10 years ago.
Yeah, probably not. No.
Yeah. No, and Miles, I just want to thank you for coming on here and sharing your story and being so open and honest with everything. It takes a lot of courage, and I'm really grateful that you did that, and I'm hoping people can get a lot of value out of this. And if you decide to come to Canada for trekking, I would definitely join you. There's a
Yeah, no,
we
that'd be very nice.
Yeah, no, we've got a lot of mountains here by Calgary, so if that ever piques your interest, definitely keep me in mind.
I will do.
Um,
Yeah.
and then you did mention your Instagram, so if people do want to get a hold of you, if they want to, chat with you or share stories or just want to learn more about yourself, where can they find you?
So it's at the sober trekker, basically. So yeah, if anyone's struggling, or just like pictures of mountains or whatever they want, I'm on there, and DM me, and I'm happy to chat anytime.
Okay, well, that's great. Again, thank you, Miles. I really appreciate this, and yeah, like we'll keep in touch and have more of these conversations.
No worries, man. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for chatting to me.
Yeah, no problem at all. Well, that's the end of the podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And again, please leave a review at the end of the episode. I would truly appreciate it. Until next week.